Well, thank you, Barney, for setting this up. And thank you especially to Arlene and B for being here and for participating in this talk. And thank you all in the audience for joining today. And of course, thank you to Printed Matter for hosting this great book fair, which obviously is such an institution, even in these new digital circumstances that we currently, are going with here. But thanks to the power of Zoom, it's so great to be able to talk with these two artists that I admire deeply and to talk about their two new books. Just a note to the audience that we're happy to take questions from the audience, and you should feel free, if you have anything that comes up, in your mind as we're talking, feel free to pop it in the questions and answers button below. That way we can see these as they come in, and we can find an opportunity to respond and to expand our conversation to incorporate them. So let me start by addressing the sort of the formal but brief bios for each of these two artists. So to say, Arlene Shechet is a multidisciplinary sculptor living and working in New York City and in the Hudson Valley. A major critically acclaimed survey of her work, All at Once, which the New York Times called some of the most imaginative American sculpture of the past 20 years, and some of the most radically personal, was on view at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston in 2015. And the artist's ambitious large-scale public project that included monumental porcelain and mixed media sculptures opened in September 2018 at Madison Square Park in New York City. Such a special and memorable show. Arlene's work, that was my little encouragement and embellishment, I should say. Shechet's work is held in many distinguished public collections, including the Brooklyn Museum of New York, CCS Bard Hessel Museum, Annandale-on-Hudson in New York, of course, the Jewish Museum, New York, and Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, as well as the National Gallery of Art, among others. And that's the end of her formal biography. And I'll just say, on a personal note, I couldn't agree more, with that New York Times quote. Arlene really is such an imaginative sculptor who creates such compelling magnetic forms. I've really been an admirer of her work and was totally won over by your great Meissen recast exhibition at the RISD Museum when I saw that in 2014. That was just like a showstopper for me. It was like such a dialogue that I was so happy to be an audience member and be part of. And I'm really excited to talk about your new book, Skirts, which was just published by Pace, and which you've kind of been on almost a little bit of a book circuit talking about between a great event that Pace hosted yesterday and in dialogue today with B and myself. And then for our other panelist, B. Wurtz, was born in 1948 in Pasadena, California, and lives and works in New York. He opened a major solo exhibition called This Has No Name at the Institute of Contemporary Arts in Los Angeles in 2018, which was curated by the amazing Jamila James. That's again, me giving her credit there and saying how great she is, while simultaneously presenting his first public commission, Kitchen Trees, through New York City's Public Art Fund. More about that in a second. In 2015, he was the subject of a retrospective exhibition at Baltic Center for Contemporary Art at Gateshead, United Kingdom. And in 2016, the exhibition traveled to La Casa Encendida in Madrid. He has also had additional solo exhibitions at the Kunstverein Freiburg, White Flag Projects in St. Louis, and Gallery 400, as well as the University of Illinois at Chicago. He has, his work has been included in group exhibitions at MoMA PS1 in New York and Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, as well as the Musée d'Art Contemporain in Lyon. And I left out the bit about my having the honor to work with B to curate his Public Art Fund exhibition, Kitchen Trees. That was just such a special, really fun, memorable experience, an honor to collaborate with him. And B is just so great. The work was really one of the best shows, best received shows that I've had the honor to work on. So you know, really so great to be in dialogue with you both. And, you know, we don't need to read a formal bio of me because, you know, I'd rather spend the time talking about these two great artists and their incredible books. I'll just say I'm a curator at Public Art Fund in New York City. And to answer the obvious question, yes, my hair used to be a lot shorter before the pandemic. Okay, let's get to it. So let's start, you know, by talking, since this is a really nice occasion to talk about, you know, these two books, but also to, you know, extend the conversation in the way that the books really lead us to a dialogue about sculpture. And really, you know, I just emailed Arlene before saying this really is a great kind of meeting of the minds when it comes to two great sculptors that I deeply admire. And I've obviously been thinking a lot about sculpture, you know, recently and you know, for a long time now. But let's start by maybe kind of introducing these two books. Do you want to, you know, Arlene, just kind of talk very briefly maybe about, just give us a kind of the top line introduction to these books, you know, titles, you know, what you kind of, how they maybe came to be, and, you know, the works that they're sort of focusing on. Arlene, would you like to start with that?
Sure. I'll show the book.
Even better.
Which I just received yesterday or the day before. So this book came about because my first show at Pace opened exactly a year ago, February 27th. And the book had already, we were talking about doing a book, but I guess within the gallery contest is seen as a catalog, but then immediately obviously the show closed 10 days after it opened. And so the book received the trauma of that and also became something that I was immensely grateful for. And in a way, maybe all books reimagine the real, you know, and this became an opportunity to think more completely and work more slowly in conceiving what a document of that show would be, but also maybe the larger body of work, because to me, a book is such a permanent thing. I mean, we all have libraries. Like, I don't understand thinking about it completely as an ephemeral thing. And so it, you know, it was a great collaboration with other means. They had already, very fortunately, come to my studio in Kingston while I was making the pieces. The pieces weren't done. I always worked till the last second. The pieces weren't done. And they were both horrified that they were done. And also, it turned out to be a gift because they really got to see a lot of the process. They got to see a lot of what I was up to. So the book needed, as a physical object, to also embrace that kind of materiality, that kind of conceptual backbone that we discussed in relationship to the book. And here's B's book, and I want him to talk about it, but I was thinking how of the like similarities and differences of both of our book and our work. I mean, B and I have been friends on and off for a long time, but the way the work is reflected in the books is something I look forward to speaking about. So B should talk about his book.
Yeah.
Okay, Arlene, it's so great you have the book, because I thought, well, what an idiot, I should have brought the book to hold up, but you have it, so excellent. So the book for me was like really fun because it wasn't my idea. I made the work, but it was Barney's suggestion to do a book on the pan paintings, and which of course I thought was fantastic. And so other people created that book, which is really fun. So and my wife, Ann Bobko, designed the book.
Wow.
in collaboration with Barney. So it was really a team effort in the most kind of exciting way. Thank
Looks like you have a
But
cameo.
Arlene has it
Talk
too.
about
Okay.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
I'm doing the lighting.
And then Erica Cook wrote this incredible essay about my work. So the book was like a gift to me. Like that is one of the most wonderful things. And it's just so gorgeous. I mean, I've gotten so many great compliments, and one at least one person, I remember one person in particular said, how in the world did they get those incredible photographs of the work? Well, Barney took all these photos in his studio, like totally professionally done. So all of this stuff added up to make this incredible object, which really wasn't my project. So how totally fun is that? The other thing I was just going to add is we did some, you can order some that I signed, and and somebody wrote me recently and said, I calculated the difference between buying an unsigned one and a signed one, and your signature is worth, I think it was something like $5.05 or something like that. I said, well, that's kind of okay, because some people told me, because I signed it with a thick Sharpie, some people said, was that stamped in there? and nope, they're all hand signed. But anyway, okay, so that's kind of the story of a book, an incredible adventure to me that I was just kind of taken along with as this thing was created.
That's so great. Thank you both for those introductions to the book. And just at this point, while we have everyone here still, we should just make sure that we say Arlene Shechet Skirts is available at Pace Gallery and on their website. I'm sure there's a way to buy it. And then B. Wurtz Pan Paintings is the other book that's published by Hunters Point Press. And that's also available on their website, along with, as you said, B, the possible autographed copy too. So that's just, I want to make sure that I'm formally giving a little bit of a plug to both of these books. Everyone really should make sure they get their hands on a copy. And thank you both for introducing the book. And let's sort of dive in a little bit more to, I thought it was really interesting, B, the way you highlighted, the design process beyond just the sort of story about how the book came to be. And, at first when I saw in the colophon in the credits, I saw that Anne was the designer of the book. I thought, well, that's a really interesting, dialogue about, how a book comes to be. And it made me sort of think a lot more, just more generally about the dialogue of that design process, how it must have been very interesting for you to work with your wife on that. And you just described a little bit of it, that maybe you were a little bit more hands off. I mean, maybe though, were there questions about it as an object, what the size of it was going to be, how the colors and the end papers and the layout and, that you were involved with. And then likewise, Arlene, I mean, you worked with the great book designer, Gary Fogelson, and this really is obviously, this book is very much a product of your dialogue, is very clear. I mean, do you want to both sort of speak a little bit partly to the object quality of these books, choices of size, paper, as well as layout and photography? You were just alluding to that as well, B, but maybe there's some kind of general discussion that we can get into about the book's materiality and the design process.
You want to go first, Arlene?
If you'd like me to, I can. Sure. Well, I immediately was thinking about the sparseness of the white and the shininess of the image, and then the humor of this, and then sort of the asshole back.
That's good.
And I I feel like humor is something that we both enjoy, and enveloped into art, and our work in particular. But I think that the in your book, so I'm talking about your book here.
I love that. I love that.
Talk
Yeah.
about both. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I mean, it was I know so much about my book, but examining the other, was really interesting. And because you brought up mice and recast, I'm going to bring it up too, because there is this Swiss binding.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's called Swiss binding. But anyway, the way this is bound is that you see the binding, and it's almost like it's a mistake. It's a little bit unsettling, but it has so much to do with the rawness of your materials and the way that rawness translate into this object, from those objects to this object. And similarly, I ended up doing for my mice and recast.
Yeah.
I wanted to do the Swiss binding for the exact same reason, because the basic mode of my Meissen project was to work off the molds. So all of the pieces also have, I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
Can you see this? Have the numbers of the molds as part of the finished object. This one you'll see more easily. That's really similar to you using the industrial process, and the numbers, like I love the numbers as part of the image in the pan paintings. So how, so the rawness, the attention to the process is reflected for both of us in these Swiss bindings. And I think the Swiss bindings are relatively like not common. So just that I when I saw that, I said, that's really weird that, we're on the same side of loving that process. Or I'm sure even though you didn't design it and this was a gift for you, I'm sure that you saw a bunch of it, of what was happening. So in this book, we worked a lot with the idea of touch. But it wasn't until I actually received the book that I realized how profound that actually is. I mean, it was my wish, but then I sort of forgot about it till I received the book. But there's just subtle things that happen with taking the image across two kinds of paper, shifting the paper, and one is absorbent and one is reflective. And when you're actually handling the paper and you're going from something that feels like really thin, almost tissue paper, craft paper, to then coated paper, it's just I was saying that it feels, or it attempts to line up with the notion of awareness and attention, and that it's a way to keep your fingers alive in the same way that when I'm working, and I think I'm pretty sure you don't work from, I never asked you, but from making a drawing to making the thing, I just work direct, and you're working with found objects that you find in the environment. I'm working with things I find in my studio, but I'm working in real time. So there's a real time feeling to my book that I was very concerned with embracing. And then there's the obvious thing of what we did with the typography, which is to build my name in the way with some of the provisionality and some of the sense of the sculpture. And it might look like it's black, but it's dark brown, which for me means everything. I don't know why. Because it's just not obvious. Like everything is very dense with choice. And as somebody just reading it, you won't know it, but in the end, it all builds up.
Well, it's so true, and so much of the sensibility of your work and of your ways of working are clearly present in this. You know, I loved what you were saying about the tactility of the pages and the paper, and it's so much like when you see a work of yours, you almost want to steal a touch. You know, there are certain like materials where
I advise people to do that.
well, of course, yeah. I mean, it's as a you know a curator, I'm horrified by that. But you know, I think the way that you have ceramic and wood and all of these things intersecting really relates very much to the process, obviously, about how you put that together. And I think to transition that to your book, to your views of your book. I mean, obviously a lot is about the photography, and maybe this sort of after we talk about your relationship to the design choices and things like that, maybe that can lead us to a conversation about how photography functions in these books as well.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to me, the relationship between our two books, because I haven't seen, Arlene, I haven't seen your physical book yet. The gallery sent me a PDF, which was great though, because it was the entire book. So I've looked at all the images, read the whole thing. I absolutely love the interviews. And I didn't know that they were both stitched in that way. So that's incredible. That was, I believe that was Barney's idea. But Anne and Barney worked so much as a team. It was also like what you said. I remember Anne saying this, no, you do that kind of binding and you lay the pages flat. There's no kind of valley of a gutter like a normal kind of binding. So that was very much thought out. And then the different colored threads and things, the materiality. Looking at your book, Arlene, made me think about the interesting relationship between our work. We're very different artists, but there's certain things that became so clear to me, this interesting comparison. I mean, we do put things together. I do make drawings sometimes, but rarely. I mostly just put things together. So that's interesting that you seem to work pretty much that way too. I think that I became very aware of the humor in both of our works. My work is sometimes described as whimsical, and I don't mind that term. I really don't. Some people might think, oh, I don't want to be called whimsical, that's stupid. I think if whimsical, but that's not all, and I don't think someone would say that meaning that's all it is. Like, well, we could kind of term it that, but there's a lot else going on. I think in both of our cases, there's humor, but a lot of seriousness, a lot of really serious looking at the world, just what's in the world, which is, and that is combined with humor. Often you've got to have humor in life. But as far as the actual making of my book, it was interesting because I already knew Anne was a great designer. So it wasn't like I was thinking, okay, what's this going to be? I knew it would be great. I knew Barney did great books. So I just kind of stood back and watched them do it. It was kind of fantastic. It's, in a way, the way I've often chosen to work with curators. I've worked with some really great curators, including Dan right here, and Jamila, Matthew Higgs, many, many great people. And I basically let them do it. that's really interesting to me. I mean, that's different for every artist. Some people, it's more important that they're more involved. If I trust the person, in a way, what happened to the book, I want to kind of just see what they do that brings something else to my work. Because I make the work, you might be a little different, Arlene, because you have a lot of things I know going at once. So you might be more thinking about how they relate in a space. But for me, I'm mostly working on an individual work. And when a curator arranges those in a space and they start to have a dialogue, then that's like again, kind of a wonderful surprise for me to see how the work could come alive with someone else's choices. And that's how I kind of felt about the book. They seem to be making really great choices. And so that was fun to just see that develop.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is super interesting. I am going to go back to the term of whimsical.
Whimsical, because you might not like it. I think you don't like it.
No. It's that it's a gender issue.
Really?
So if you're like, probably if somebody, as a man, being called whimsical is really okay. You're you can gain control of the vocabulary attached to you in a way that whimsical has been absolutely used to flatten women. I don't
think of that.
Yeah, you wouldn't think of it, and you don't have to think of it, and congratulations, and I actually don't, I feel the way I feel about writing, the way you describe feeling about installation, like one of the things that was very upsetting to me in having my show shut down was that, there weren't, people didn't have a chance to get to see it when, and so there wasn't the writing about it that there otherwise would have been. And I mean, I know there would have been, because there were so many appointments that just got wiped out. So that idea of somebody else giving meaning and placement to the work is one of the most important things about having a show. Like, it's, people say, oh yeah, having a show, to become, to reap the rewards of fame and fortune. No, you're having a show to figure out what the fuck you're doing, and you're having a show to learn something. I mean, there's no greater gift than to work with a curator, or to have even a studio visit, or maybe from the books we'll get that information where you get that kind of knowledge about what you're doing that you don't have. And so I feel strongly about that. But
you talked about that in one of your interviews, seeing the work installed comes to life in a new way as opposed to in the studio. And that's how I've always felt too. It's like, wow, it's a different place and it looks different, It's thrilling, kind of.
It's totally thrilling. I mean, sometimes it can be disheartening.
Well, one hopes not.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of, actually the funny thing was that, so I worked for a long period of time just in New York City, but in a basement studio with some windows, but no real light. And I repeatedly had the experience of putting things in the world and be like, oh my God, this is what it looks like, like in a lit environment.
Yeah.
It's like, and that's when I, over the years finally said, as soon as my kids are old enough gotta get myself out of the city because I've got to get some light.
That's another thing we share. I've worked in a basement studio
Oh.
for many years. I still work in the basement here on woodworking, things like that. But I was able to finally get, we used to have like a roommate on this floor. I was finally able to get this floor to do like cleaner things with light, but I could totally, I didn't know that we shared that thing about the basement for years.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
the other thing I was going to say that's interesting about our relation to our work, I mean, a lot of people have assumed I'm a female.
Oh.
Partly the initial, and I did that deliberately. When I chose to go by B, I didn't want a gender attached to it. I didn't want anything except this sort of persona name that someone might think, okay, who is this? I wanted them to look at the work, and in some ways, it's kind of funny to me that I think my work looks a bit more like a woman made it, and yours perhaps looks more like a man made it because you deal with big stuff, like bigger stuff than I do. I think that's pretty great because I never like stereotyping, pigeonholing people. But wait, before I forget, here's another thing I thought looking at your book and thinking about our work together. One thing I really like about my pan painting is that I would call those sculptures, they're three-dimensional, certainly, but I think they are playing at being paintings. I call them paintings, pan painting. Your work is almost like painting playing at being sculpture because it's a very difficult thing to put color in three-dimensional sculpture. I've found that over the years, and not only thinking about the work I made, but looking at other people's work. So that's a really good trick to have all that color. And so we both kind of mess up this category thing of what is a painting and what is a sculpture, which used to also drive me nuts because it's not like I never got awarded that many grants, but you used to have to apply in either painting or sculpture, and it's like,
I know.
come on. I mean, that kind of made me want to like forget the whole thing. This is so stupid.
I know. I had that problem in art school.
Yeah.
Where people were just like, wait, just stay in one place, do one thing, put your blinders on. Like the business of being an artist without not putting blinders on, what are you talking about? And also the history of art, and it's so archaic because the true history of art with artists we all admire through the centuries is that they did more than one thing. In the 21st century, and we're still fighting the fight. You know, like I loved, and I'm glad you brought it up, that you were calling pan paintings.
Yeah.
You know, because it's such a play. It's also such a play on panned paintings. You know, it's so playful. But color and objects. Color in 3 dimensions is, I mean, there's nothing I love more than painting a sculpture or putting, you know, color into it because it's so much more complex. You know, like the flatness of a painting is that accepts the image, accepts the color in a much more uniform way. This is like not light and time become part of the color if you're putting color into sculpture. I was going to say one other thing.
Please.
On the issue of whimsy and humor, that I feel like what makes people uncomfortable, or what people haven't really come to, is that something can be funny or whimsical or witty and still be smart. Like we separate we separate what we in the same way, like separation. We separate that something can be very smart and not and have wit, have humor, and not and actually have that be part of elevating it, not diminishing it.
Well, it's great you said this, because when I was reading your interview and I was thinking about humor, it made me think, I'm glad, because I wanted to bring this up. Years and years ago, I remember an article, it might have been even in the New Yorker, it was about Monty Python and their films. And the article was a very serious article saying that you can get to some really deep things about the human condition, life, everything through humor. It was an amazing article. And so that's maybe why I would never take offense at the word whimsical. Or I would also not take an offense if, like you said, if someone said that about a woman's work. It's like, well, finally people started to realize a lot of stuff women did was like super fantastic, you know, like you know, making rugs or quilts or whatever. Like, this is serious stuff. There was a great interview. I have a book of interviews with Andy Warhol from over many years. And there was an interview with him, very early 70s, where the interviewer said, well, what do you think about a lot of women are getting a lot of attention now in the art world? It's kind of new. And he said, well, women always made the best art, which is kind of what I'm talking about, re-looking at this stuff. So what might be considered at one time an insult, I wouldn't consider that an insult. Now I'd consider it a compliment.
Well, I think for so long there's been this sort of, you know, shift to try to break down these dichotomies and, you know, high low, the male female, the lightweight, the heavyweight, that, like, you know, oftentimes the seriousness of what's typically seen as the opposite of whimsy is really just to cover up, you know, intellectual and conceptual emptiness. And it's really the things that are funny or seeming, you know, presenting as lightweight or accessible that are really the deepest.
And also insider, outsider, if you want to use those terms. I mean, Roberta Smith has been so much interested in this, like a lot of what was called outsider art should be in museums, just thought of as like any other art. So I think it's great to try to break down these categories.
Well, maybe this actually gets us to a discussion of, you know, the quote unquote ready-made quality of your works, you know, or materials in your works. And I think, B, what was the essay title, if I'm remembering correctly, it was Oven Ready Made.
Yeah.
You know? And I think that sort of is again, another sort of fun play on words, but, you know, it speaks to the fact that in both of your works, you're working with materials that you're finding or that you're sourcing, that aren't necessarily always seen as traditional kind of high art, you know, materials. And yet, you know, through a process of translating them, of working with them, you know, you really bring them to this, to a much deeper, higher level meaning, the way we were just, you know, describing things that are accessible in other ways, Ken. Do you have, you know, particular thoughts about how these two, let's call them, you know, operations are linked, or how they fit together with what we were just talking about, of the sort of social function of things like humor and you know, typically seen as low works?
Do you want to go first, Arlene? Yeah.
I mean, I see that humor provides an entry into artwork.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, one of the reasons I love public, you know, showing outside of the traditional art structures. So where you really want entry, you really want to give people access and the ability to enter the work. I mean, in an art context, I think it's absolutely the same, but it's more essential, I feel, in a public in a public situation. So the idea of found and not found is another barrier that I find confusing, because there maybe because I use so much of what I just see around, but I then tamper with it.
Yeah.
Whereas B tampers with it while using it more whole.
Right.
So I think that's, I might, just work it over more, but where the base information comes from, I sort of don't know. Everything's a synthesis. So I just feel like at a certain point I just stop thinking about what's found and what's not found, or why or what, or asking myself. And maybe that's the thing about making art for a long time. I'm just gonna trust myself and go with the flow. And that's the gift, and that's the same sense I get with B's stuff. Like I've heard B's work referred to as ephemeral. And I'm like, no, what are you talking about? That's like, what does that mean? That it's probably less ephemeral. I mean, people are making things out of lipstick and compact powder, that's ephemeral. Or people worry about like, oh, ceramics, that can break. I'm like, wait a minute, you can put your hand through a painting, like what? That's easier to break. What are we talking about here? There's so much emotional and psychological information for each individual involved in their own set of building a vocabulary in and out of the studio. So I was thinking, what's interesting, if you were going to see like, do books become found things, like what's the next level? But B should answer.
I want to get there. I want to get there at some point too, because it relates back to what you were saying about exhibitions and the sort of temporal nature of it. And I think, that that ephemeral quality, it feels, things being categorized as ephemeral feels like it fits into some of the lightweight things that we were just talking about before, which I certainly don't see in either of your work. I in fact see a monumentality, even if it's through objects that may be, found objects. They're not ready-mades in a traditional sense. They're objects that are found and utilized and incorporated into things. And those, found color and joyfulness of the object, those are then, as you say, entry points to elevate the work even further. I mean, B, do you have thoughts sort of?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of continue with your question about the whole subject of found objects and also the ephemeral thing. I'm going to combine those two things in an answer, because I don't know if I'm really aware of people calling my work ephemeral. So that's interesting to hear that you've heard that. I would absolutely not call it ephemeral. I would call it, but I would call perhaps some of the things I work with ephemeral, not meaning they would physically disintegrate, but that they would become obsolete. Now, the plastic bags is an interesting example, because I've worked with those for years. When I started, to me, it was the most ordinary thing, overlooked kind of thing that I could think of. And yet they were kind of fantastic visually. So now I've seen how that has changed over the years. What a plastic bag is. They're now detrimental to the environment. They're not properly recycled. I still have, enormous amounts of plastic bags I've seen, which should probably maybe someday be in a museum, like an anthropology museum, because I've saved them. So in a way, the reason my work is not ephemeral is because, like Dan, like you said, I play with monumentality, even if it's on a very small scale. It's saving those things to be looked at, and to be looked at in relation to life, the real world we live in, which is one of the reasons I think I use found objects, because I'm not a person who believes that I need to tell you what my work means, or someone else figures out definitively what it's supposed to mean. That's not interesting to me. However, all work has meaning of some kind, even if it's changeable, even if it depends on the viewer. So for me, the found objects is kind of a meaning about real life, human existence on this earth, and what we use to live. And what's interesting is I just earlier today, I didn't know about this today, but I saw a very interesting webinar from the Tang Museum about the show there related to huts and energy in all directions, which works from their collection combined with shaker objects. And this same kind of thing was being discussed in that webinar, that the shakers made things to be used. But it was a philosophical, well, I guess they would call it a religion, but that's a, whatever, universe, philosophy, religion, whatever. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what phrase to use, but their philosophy was life, living life, working. That's where the art is. You don't have to make a separate art. So I don't go along with that, because I don't make design objects, but I use objects that are useful. And there's to me, like a lot of meaning in that, a lot of meaning.
It's so good. And as you were speaking, I was also just realizing that maybe what these sort of mischaracterizations, let's call them, of works, whether it's whimsy or ephemeral or I think ultimately it sounds like it comes down to maybe a misunderstanding of what's really happening in sculpture. And I think sculpture is something that even informed audiences sometimes don't have necessarily the vocabulary, or they don't think they have the tools to understand and to experience. And so maybe things like fragility and precarity and tension, vulnerability that the work is kind of presenting at times as a tool to accomplish something, is really where this lack of understanding is coming from. I mean, do you have thoughts? Obviously you both really utilize those aspects in your work. I mean, are those things that maybe also, to sort of loop it back, that are related to the process of putting together a book, and to what it means to have an exhibition that is existing at a certain time and place where only so many people will actually experience it in person, and then the works will all go their separate ways, just as they came into existence, at different points, or maybe are living in different places and are brought together in a retrospective or something like that. And then how a book really likewise is bringing together or sort of crystallizing that moment, but also I mean, Arlene, in the detail shots and the different angles of the works, how the work was photographed, it's very clear that you're almost giving your audience a sort of a helping hand to understand, the tensions and the precarity and the height changes and things like that are experienced in the work, and likewise be the sort of almost kind of, there's almost a what's the right word, a kind of serial, scientific way that these works were photographed in a very kind of frontal way. I mean, sorry, I'm blabbing now a little bit, but I'm curious about how these things sort of connect, how these two aspects connect, and how it speaks to the function of a book and how it will sort of live on and help audiences, in these other ways.
Yeah. Well, there's so many things to say. That was good. Keep talking. But just clarifying, I think when people say ephemeral, one of the things that they're saying is provisional. I think it's a vocabulary
Yes.
problem, where ephemeral meaning like it looks like it could fall apart. But, and I have to tell people, sometimes how hard I have to work to make it look like it falls apart.
That's good.
Completely.
Well, that is always the worst part of the engineering of my pieces, is making them a thing, making them a whole thing, but engineering them so they look the way they need to have a sense of provisionality, which, as B already made note of, is part of being alive. And if we didn't know it before, this pandemic has brought it home, being alive is not just a temporary state, it's a precarious state. So and it's an ever changing story. And the very nature of a book is that it has time built into it. And I love that about it. That there's this moving through, it orders it for people, and so that's very different than having an exhibition, but for me, because of the scale of my stuff. But the time of, that you could pick it up and put it down, that it exists over time. I always say a book, like my husband's a writer, and I always like, God, I'm so jealous. Like every time he has a book, it's like, I'm so jealous of that you can put everything you want into this book, and it's like the best edition ever. Thousands and thousands and thousands distributed over a year, and it's just the words are like live with full meaning. The meanings, of course, always change as they address life, but the idea of this fantastic edition of hundreds of thousands, wow, that's great. But having the book and having your book and having my whole library, I do think of these things living in other people's homes, living in other people's libraries, living over time, so that they can like be records and objects, and like, because we're obviously obsessing about how they look and feel, and what they communicate as things in and of themselves. They're not anonymous. So by the time you pull this out of the stack, of a library, you already know a good deal about this work, this person.
That's a great point. And actually, it speaks to a question that we just had submitted, which was, first the person saying that they love and admire the attention to details in the book, and asking, do either of you see these books as a contribution to archives and or legacy? So I think, a lot of what you were just describing, Arlene, is about the physical, nature of the book, but starts to get to that second part of archives and legacy. I mean, B, do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that as well?
Well, to me, a book it's different than an art installation, but it's related. because it's another ordering of the things, and in a wonder. And Arlene was pretty much covering this, but it's in a wonderfully intimate way that someone can sit in their house anywhere and look and get an idea. Now, it's not like seeing the work in person. Of course, it never is looking at images on a computer either, but still, it has a place, and especially with a physical book, because that's very different than a JPEG.
Yeah.
You know, photos are beautiful. And so there's to me, a kind of added element to the pan book for me, which is when I first started making the pans, I thought of them as being very much like flowers. They're extremely structurally sound, and yet extremely delicate at the same time. I mean, I've had problems of like a kid running up and smashing one at a museum, or, you know, and there's something kind of wonderful about, I mean, I love that vulnerability. We were talking about that little, the vulnerability is something kind of poetic and profound in art if it's kind of vulnerable. But I love that the book, they're not vulnerable in that way, and it kind of just adds another layer to the thing, and also a kind of a funny flattening, because I already kind of call them paintings anyway, so they get flattened like a, you know, more like a painting would appear in the book. So I just enjoy all those different possibilities that can come through a book.
Yeah, I think the work as the books as invulnerable is maybe speaks to that idea.
Yeah,
I
it's
love
interesting.
it like that, and does speak to maybe the question of the archive and the time that it is. I absolutely feel like, you know, very few people see the works in person, actually these days, and that the book is another orchestration of the intention behind the work.
It's very much to me related to recorded music, because years ago, the only way you heard music was live. And now when they invented recording, there's still live music, but there's recordings, and which are great. It's not the same as live music though, it's just another thing. But we're lucky to have it, because we wouldn't be able to, we can hear all this music, we couldn't physically be all these places to hear it live. So I think that's quite related to books, actually.
Yeah, that's good.
I think that's so beautiful, and that brings us right to 4 o'clock. It literally, as you were wrapping it up there, and I have lots of additional thoughts, obviously, but I think we
have to stop right at 4 because I love people's questions.
Yeah. You know what? Let's sort of now take it to say, you know, it's 4. So, and that was such a beautiful ending of you know, of a train of thought that I think we really thoughtfully carried through here. So let's open it up. You know, if there are other comments, questions, please feel free to pop them either in the chat or the Q&A below, and we can make sure that we're at least addressing some of them. And maybe to kind of get started on it, you know, as they're coming in, I just want to ask one sort of point of clarification for you both, right? Which is that the book has, I believe, 68 pan paintings in it, which is clearly not the whole suite of pan paintings you've made. You've made many more than that, yes? But it is sort of functioning a little bit like a catalog raisonné. And Arlene, if I'm right, there are 14 works that were in the show, but then there are others that are sort of brought in, other works either brought in as kind of comparative material or historic material. I mean, was that a part of the consideration for you each about kind of how much to bring in here, or was this something that was sort of limited by, you know, what you could get photos of or access to? Are they all from the same collection B, or are they kind of a catalog resonating in that sense?
I'm going to answer first because it'll be shorter, and then I think Arlene might have more to say. But in my case, a lot of them were in possession of Metro Pictures, so that was kind of, and then we did borrow some from collections, but it was basically somebody curated that book, which was Barney, and I guess basically Barney, and I don't know, is Anne, well, she was involved, but so it was curated in the way that a show was curated, that those were, of course, they're not all the pans that were made, it's a curated group. And that's, I think that's great. I love that. So,
Great.
So.
Yeah, well, I mean, this really was based on my show, but then was also a bit bigger than my show, but the decision was made that we should focus on this this group of works that were shown and not seen as much as they might have been. But you know, that Pace has a tradition of doing catalogs for a lot of shows, but I didn't really want it to be that, because I feel like I wanted it to have more heft, and that I just was happy to wait. But you know, they went with this idea, especially because the show closed down. Although I guess they were thinking about it before. So anyway.
That's great. Well, it looks like there aren't any questions yet.
Really?
We have a shy audience, or maybe it's just that you've both, you know, exhausted. You've exhausted the topic so thoroughly. And I think, you know, especially that beautiful note, but really to everyone in the audience, Arlene and Bea are very excited, would love to answer any questions that you might have, either about these books or about anything more generally related to their practice. None yet. So then,
I think 2 in the chat at the bottom. What does that mean? So from
oh,
earlier.
Good. Well, those 2 were when we were talking about whimsical related to gender. They were agreeing with those with the comments there, and we just got a very thoughtful, very kind note saying thank you for the conversation. This could go on. We'll give one more. Maybe I'll prompt with one more, because of course I have to ask this question and give everyone time to finalize typing in there, which is just to ask about you've both had, you know, a really special opportunities to do public art. Can you just sort of, you know, address, you know, the context of shifting your work from, you know, a domestic or gallery or museum setting into the public space, public sphere, and what was the process like for you, and the positives and negatives, maybe just to kind of address that as we get the final attempt at squeezing questions out of the audience here. Sorry.
Well, I think public art is, or art that gets in the way. That's the way I like to think about it. And when I did my Madison Square Park project, I made a particular point of using the pathways. They literally art got in the way, because the special thing about being an artist, and that we take for granted, that we get to touch art and live with art and be informed by and enlightened by that experience. And, you know, most of the world doesn't. And so in New York City, such a diverse, fabulous, you know, large population, I really like the idea that people can touch the stuff, just like on the simplest level. Like and I observe people that whole issue that we were talking about before. Oh, sneak a touch. Well, outside, you don't have that. That anxiety, and that maybe isn't talked about as you know, that it's like body to body with the thing, and that you don't have to, that it exists on a lot of different levels, you know, exists on the just the surface, so you can get back from it. There's just a way that it can exist with the environment, you know, the architecture of the city. If you like urban architecture, which I do, there's so many things to play with, you know, and there's so many references, so it's just a very, very rich thing. And plus time again, so it can, generally it would be up more, you know, longer, and so it would have a life that is you know, that gives it different kinds of meanings, but also the downside is that it requires crazy amounts of planning, and usually money. So so that, you know, more money because of scale, or you know,
durability, and of course.
So all of that can get in the way of wanting to do that all of the time. But I feel so privileged to be able to shift back and forth between the intimacy of the studio. I'm working on some other outdoor things, and you know, the intimacy of the studio, and then the different environment of the public sphere. Yeah, it's great.
That's great.
Okay, Dan, you know my story with my public art, but I'll tell people briefly. I'm glad we talked about this, because I was thinking, Arlene, you and I both had outdoor things kind of near each other, and I loved your pieces in the park. I remember that day I came by and you were there.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, so okay, for me, the public art thing, Dan, you invited me, you said, you want to submit a proposal? And I thought, oh my God, no, I'm not a person that does outdoor art. But then it's like, well, but I love a challenge. So then we, you know, collaborated on that incredible project. And I found, because one of the things, besides just the way I make my work, but I thought, people aren't going to get my work. It's too esoteric. This is for like art intellectuals. This is for the art world. They're not going to get it. And then we're like installing, the day we're installing them, and people were like really liking them. It was like totally thrilling. Like, you know, maybe I thought people wouldn't relate to ordinary things, but they do, because they're from their life, you know, everyone's life. And so that was a total thrill that the public liked those. It really opened up something new. It was a completely wonderful opening into a new realm for me. And well, thanks to you, Dan. It was incredible. I do have to say, as far as the touching thing, I'm a bit like you. I had this thing, no, you can't touch art. You really shouldn't touch art. And I remember, and I think where this may have come from, I went to the Vatican in 1968, college trip to Europe with a friend. And the Pieta, the toes were dirty brown from people touching them. I never forgot that. Now there's why you don't touch art. And I'm sure now they probably got some bulletproof glass thing around.
Someone hit it with a hammer too at one point, you remember. Someone broke off one of the toes of it. Yeah.
And when I went to the Louvre, the Mona Lisa was just there on the wall. I mean, luckily I didn't like slip and run, you know, fall into it or something.
Different times entirely. Well, we got a comment saying, I touched all of your pieces at Madison Square Park. So that you should
Keep
be
that in it.
happy to know that, Arlene. That's
Yeah.
and then we've got a few questions. This is good. We got one that maybe is a quick answer. It's also wondering if you have collaborated in the past or have plans to in the future. Have you collaborated? I wasn't able to dig up any, other than maybe you were both in a group show here and there, the Dieudonné show or something like this, maybe. But no chance, no opportunity to yet.
We never have, but want to? Maybe. I'm up for it.
This is a collaboration of sorts, you know. And then I think, you know, two others that are really kind of nice here that came in. One is wondering if you could speak a little bit about humor in the work. You know, do you set humor as an intention or does it appear in process? And then the final one, which I think is just great, is you know, if you think of planning a book as a form of public art. And that I think addresses some of what we were talking about the way that a book lives on, you know, and you don't know where your book's going to end up, if it ends up in a library or a, you know, friend's bookshelf or in the Strand or wherever. So maybe there's a lot there, but maybe we can kind of bring that all together and lead that towards a conclusion. Is there anything that...
You can answer.
Well, what I was going to say, I love the comment about books as public art. That's really fantastic. I love that. As far as humor, I am not going to speak for Arlene, but I suspect she may be the same. I do not ever start out to make a humorous work. I think I just like humor and it's going to come out in some way, but I never think about it, never plan to make anything funny. Maybe sometimes it's kind of wonderful for me to see something that people do think is funny that I didn't really see at first. And then it's like, well, that's great, you know, like, I mean, humor, yes, humor saves us all in a way, you know, in life. So it's a great thing.
Yeah. I think it's more like physical humor anyway. You know, that it's like the Marx Brothers, or, you know, you're gonna
love it.
It's like way corny, you know, it's way more it's way cornier. It's not like gonna be like a stand-up, it's not gonna be a perfect joke. I mean, we obviously know lots of art where there's a punchline, and that's just not what I'm drawn to at all. So as B said, I could never start out. I'm not funny enough to start out.
But we know it would be a mistake. We know it would be trying to guide the view. That's the problem. It's like, oh, this is what it means. No, that's often a really bad idea. Right? And unfortunately, a lot of people in graduate school think that's what you should do. And somebody really should tell them, no, avoid that.
Yeah. Like, that goes along with like never write an artist statement, never try to make anything funny. Like when I go to talk at schools, people are like, the faculty hates me because
I always feel like
nobody has ever read an artist statement that has been informative. But I think the other part will be, don't try to make anything funny. Yeah. Okay. We can write the book, the next book. Anyway.
There's the collaboration. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, this has just been such an absolute pleasure. I feel like we could keep talking for hours. But I'm so glad that you were able to take this time out and share with us and share with our great audience. And I'm so excited about these books. Thank you for bringing them into the world and for all that you do with your art and with sharing for us all. So thank you.
Nice to be in your kitchens.
Yes.
Thank you, Dan. You were great. And thank you, Barney, for the book. And it's been really fun. Really fun.
Very fun.
Great.
Thank you, Arlene. You're great.
Thank you, B.
Thank you so much, everyone. Buy the books. Buy them. Have them. Cherish them.
Yep. Get them in the world. Okay.
Are we done?